Yo, guys and girls. I'm Mikey Microphone, and the microphone is a metaphor for the fact that you have something beautiful to say, but you need to make the arrangements so that you can be heard. Now, I'm actually just thinking about a hashtag that I created, mile pace tracks, because I wanted to use songs that were around 8.5, 8 minutes long to motivate myself to run a mile or multiple miles at a pace that was somewhat of a challenge for me. Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge. I think that if I'm able to continue working out every day, I think that my expectation is that my body will be able to increase that pace. When I was in high school, I did a fair amount of running, and I was able to go at like a 6 minute pace, sometimes down to around 5. So, I mean, I'm much older now, but I think that if I'm able to stick with the exercise, then I'll be able to end up running pretty fast. And so I was thinking about how I feel good today. I feel better than I did yesterday. And thinking about tomorrow, should I try to run 4 miles or should I stick with 3 for a little while? I guess it'll somewhat depend on whether anyone picks up my hashtag, mile pace tracks, and sends me some tracks that I should listen to. So that's what I'm thinking about now. Also, just there's a cricket in the basement here, and I went down there, I found it, I saw it, and I was like, should I squish it? But I didn't want to do that. I would rather scoop it up and take it outside, but I was a little too shy to just grab onto it. I kind of made a move at it, but it got away, so I'll try again later. So I've just been working on this interface, and there is some more styling to do. The most important thing right now is to actually style these links. I want these to look more like these. So I'm just gonna find the font, and I'm gonna grab, actually this will be pretty simple to do. I'm just going to, because I think this style is attached to this class here. I've got the font, the alignment, and the margin all defined by that. So if I can just add a div with this class to these review links here, that's all I'll need. Okay. So visually this is a little weird, but at this juncture no one else is going to see these links except me. So I can revisit that if and when I get some other authors onto the platform. And if I do that, I will probably move these tool sets into a separate scope so that the scribe user type is not going to be the same as the person who's reviewing. This is more like an editor, right? So the writer and the editor need to be separate. That's the tradition. So now the actual interface that comes after. Okay, so what I'll do is create a list. let's say like bounce spells. Spells that can return permanents to the hand. And then that spell. Summon. Okay. So now if I look at this interface, it's kind of ugly. If I look at this interface, it's kind of screwed up. It's actually kind of cool to get to see the art nice and big like this. But it's not what I want for this interface. What I'm going to do is borrow some more of this style sheet, because I realize that I do want to be able to display the formatting. If somebody submits an item that visually looks okay, but had some kind of markup that included unsportsmanlike material, I would want to be able to, during the admin step, I would want to be able to display the unformatted version of the content. So I realized that a lot of this interface is actually going to be useful for the approval process. It just needs to be styled. And the reason that, okay, so let's see where this is receiving its styles. Okay. I think simply the fact that a listed item element is being nested inside a list item is probably enough to provide a match. So looking at the listed items review, I think I can probably just add a class list to that one, possibly. So let's see what happens here. Okay, so now, yep, all of that stuff is now displayed. So these interfaces, let's see, include card. This is relevant, something I might want to do. Remove permalink. That's interesting. Like, in a sense, these links don't belong here, and I could use the style sheet. Okay, so the options that I have for dealing with this are I could just leave them here and trust that I won't use them unless I know what I'm doing. B, I could use CSS to hide them, which basically makes them impossible to interact with most of the time. C, I could use logic in the template to forego ever generating that markup in the first place when it's being rendered in this context. And I guess D is like I could make these into parts of my interface that I can leverage, and I can revisit the code in the controller that is going to be triggered so that I can kind of have an expectation that they'll work the way that I want them to, even though I'm actually logged in as someone else who's not the list owner. So okay, so that last one is more than I want to bite off right now. I suppose what makes sense is just to leave it as is. Yeah, cool. So I got the styling in place. Looking here, I think probably what makes sense to me is just to kind of leverage some of the styling that is gonna is gonna be awarded to these elements. Just the centering, the font, and the fact that they're not on the same line. I think that would make this interface more. So technically, this is for reviewing, the content. This interface here is enough for me to do what I need to do. But there is sometimes issues that can only be noticed when things are being displayed as they will be displayed. Sometimes when things get put onto multiple lines, there are juxtapositions that end up being inappropriate. I think it's pretty far-fetched to plan against my user community so that they can't like make things line up in a way that is some kind of a sly trolling operation. But then again, I really wouldn't be that surprised to see it. The main reason that I want to update this now is just for my own smooth sailing, as it were. I don't want to see this font. I want to see this one. So let's see what. Okay, let's go to a list that has. Here's a list. Okay. So the font that these are using. Cabin. Should I just go all the way and use the display toolset here? Maybe I should. I mean, that would give me a way to edit things. Like if I found a typo and I wanted to edit it during the approval process. Let's see, masthead of list. At this point, I'm going to look at how that stuff was rendered, not how it was styled. So I'm going to go to this review page. So right now I can see that this data is just being printed out in basically a raw form. There's no divs wrapping it. And if I look at the lists show page, I'll be able to see how the markup is generated. Okay. So it's basically just raw stuff here. I could convert this into a helper. Another issue with this interface is that it's not showing me what they intend to put on the list. So that context could be really important to knowing whether the list is appropriate content. So let me think. As I'm reviewing the list, I think I want to be able to, okay, I want to be able to see it, but I don't want to always see it. Another issue is that, okay, great. So editing a list, it will have to go back through review, because what if somebody made a list called like excellent players from 2015, and they made a list of people, and it's like, okay, yeah, this is cool, and then they changed the name of the list to like, I'm trying to think of a thing that would slip by my attention because it sounded cool, but it actually was insulting. Like if they changed the name to players who broke onto the scene in 2015, I might be like, okay, that's appropriate, but it might end up being actually an insult, right? So when I'm approving the list, I want to be able to see it, and probably the simplest way to provide that interface is to have it always on. And actually, lists do have a built-in. See what happens if I click this. Okay, it didn't hide. I might have to grab a script from the sub list. I think I can grab a script that will make it hideable. So okay, I'm going to push this stuff into a helper. So I'll get rid of these real quick. Then I'll get rid of these. Then I will get rid of these. Okay. So there's a few syntactical differences between how things are done in templates and how they're done in helpers. One of the most obvious ones is how I use the plus sign concatenation. Okay. And these helpers should still work. Okay, so list is within this code block. It's not an instance variable, it is a local variable. Okay, so I think that might be ready. So we'll go in here. I'll replace all of this with that. See if it works. Okay, looks all right for now. Then I can do the same in here. I have edit tool. Okay, so suggest an addition is a link that appears in nested lists. It's actually just a link to the list, kind of like a permalink, if you will. And it's, in that sense, it's kind of misnamed. Now, anyone who wants to suggest addition will be able to by clicking that link. But there might also be good reasons to click that link even if you don't want to suggest addition, if you just want to go to look at that list to view it in isolation. So for that reason, the interface is a little confusing because people won't know that they can just do that. Trying to think of some kind of terminology that would imply both things are possible. Permalink? No, it's more like view sublist. Maybe more of an icon. Perhaps it's best to like use videos to train people how to use this interface. Okay. So display list here is code that's being used to display a nested list in another list. I guess at the moment I don't really need to revisit how that is being done. I think I'm going to move forward with the exact thing that I was doing, which is working on this review page and making the review page into something that more closely mirrors basically this part. So here's the new item adder that does not need to be part of the review page. Here is the button that's part of that new item adder. It's kind of a lot of code for just a button. So I can push that into a helper. So the dilemma here is that the markup begins here, and this div extends all the way down to here. If I want to make this into a helper which gets reused on both pages, I will need to incorporate logic which allows it to omit this and potentially this. So I think that at this stage it's probably okay to leave all this markup here, not squash it all into a single helper, and just kind of use this portion of the markup to generate a helper that I can use during the review and approval process. Because, yeah, thinking about it now, I mean, I'll happily move all this code here into a helper of its own, but trying to fit this whole template into a helper which can be reused is not quite the right philosophy, because I want the list page to be one of the most sophisticated tools on the site. So it's likely that it will wind up having more nuances, and building them into a helper which has to use conditionals to detect what context it's being rendered in is not quite in alignment with the goals that I have to make this something that can be customized and enhanced. So I'm going to go back to the helper. Just removing these tags manually this time. If you want to get some extra credit, you can compare the video and see which technique was faster, whether the find and replace was, or whether the simple typing was. And there is one concatenation here. So this will need to have parentheses, and this will need to have parentheses, and then they will actually need to be concatenated with the plus sign. I'll change the @list variable into a list variable. Okay, and listed items here is a instance variable set up in the controller, because the logic for which listed items are displayed is based upon who it is that's logged in. So in the context of a reviewable display, I can probably display most of the listed items. Anything that has been rejected or removed won't need to be displayed, but rejected, removed, or replaced. So those are the ones that, okay, so let's say list dot listed items, and then the scope that omits those. So we have remaining. So anything not rejected, removed, or I can use remaining. Rejected, removed, suggested. So anything that's unreviewed, it doesn't need to be considered part of the list for publication, but it doesn't need to be omitted either, because I'll still have a chance to reject those things in my interface if they seem inappropriate. On the other hand, it is useful to know, to see what is there, because if I did get behind in my review duties, there might be some unreviewed material that was visible. It would only be visible to people who are logged in. Anything unreviewed will never actually be visible to the public. But if you're logged in, I mean, if you just bought the book, you could be, a young person. You could be an impressionable person. So I suppose it seems like it might be useful to use this scope rather than reducing the shown list items to ones that have been approved. So I could be viewing a slightly misleading version of the list, but if I did get behind in my review process, okay, might be useful. Reviewable display of lists. So this now can go in the review template. And if I look here, okay. So the font is quite large. It looks nice, actually. I think that's fine. I mean, it's a little jank, but I'll have some fun with it for a little while I can get away with it. I really like the way that looked, actually. I guess part of the reason I'm leaving it is because I want to open my mind to whether that's actually a better interface, and I want to see some of the things that happen when like some of these some of these lists have longer names, some of them have descriptions, and so if I get the chance to be exposed to some of this through the review process, then I will get to see it in a large size and see if that tends to be a good way to display the stuff, or if it tends to be too crowded because the information is a little bit too long-winded. Okay, so I have created the styling tools that I need to make sure that no incendiary information gets through. Seems like reasonable code in there. So okay, so we have styling of list review tools. Okay, so in the next video, I am going to be working on the book editing interface. I have just a couple of final styling goals that I want to finish before I make the video which shows prospective authors how they can use my platform and this interface to write their books. So in the meantime, remember to go to Ways We Mage to create lists, which can carry all that beautiful formatting and that incredible information. And as you create lists, I will see, some examples of types of information that fit into the platform in different ways. Different lists have different logic, and as we see how the platform needs to work, we'll discover new things about the formatting and the life cycle of the data that we can deal with. And then when we learn from those and we make those possible, then we might even discover new forms of content that are useful to our community. I mean, I'll give you one example. So right now, there is not a way in this system to indicate which content is evergreen and which content is meant to be specifically enjoyed for a certain period of time, and then after that won't be as relevant. So that interface issue or that's kind of like a UI issue that might make some people hesitant to write their content on this platform. You know, people are used to writing articles and there's a date plastered on it, so people will know they'll know how to evaluate its freshness. So that's one example. You know, having an interface where the date is not displayed, that might make it possible for people to create types of content that aren't usually possible on something like a WordPress. But then again, we might give them the option, right? They might be able to write when they expect it to be relevant, and they might even be able to put an expiration date on it so that it won't be visible after a certain time. In fact, that can be one of the best ways to encourage engagement, is if you say, hey guys, this will not be available after tomorrow. So I do have a plan for a version of that, which is that, so currently the order that these lists are displayed in changes every hour. They're displayed in a randomized order, but the randomization algorithm is seeded by a number that changes every hour. So, for example, local gaming stores is at the top of the list, right? Or like Pro Tour Hall of Fame. If you were using the site and you were kind of returning to it over and over and over again to perhaps to add, so if you were trying to add details to this list, you're trying to add, I know a website that this person uses as a public, content vehicle that they want to be highlighted. So you could suggest an edit, and you could be adding content to this list, and then you could be continuing your research, and you might not have left this page open. You might return to this page. So for the rest of the hour, this list is going to be here, but then after that, these things will be reshuffled, and so there is a little bit of time sensitivity in the interface, but I still think that the issue of evergreen content being intermingled would it's like kind of the intermingling of reference information with opinion and editorial. So these are some cool topics that I look forward to hearing your input on how we should address them. All right, thanks a lot. See you guys in just a few minutes.